supplies you'll need. So you'll need fabric, you'll need matching thread, elastic thread, interfacing, and then you'll need all your regular stuff like scissors and a sewing machine obviously. You're going to need a point turner though and a safety pin. So for the fabric, I'd suggest using something stable like linen or poplin, not something like a gauze, something that's stable, easy to work with, just because the neckline can stretch out quite easily. So unless you're quite experienced, obviously go for whatever you want then. You could also choose to fully line the bodice, so therefore you wouldn't need the interfacing. That's an option as well. So on to the next step is cutting out the pattern pieces. So this is assuming you've already pieced together your PDF pattern. So either you printed it out A4 or letter, or you've printed it at the copy shop. So matching those hearts and those circles. So I'm just pinned it in to the fabric, making sure the grain line is in line. So you should have 8 pieces. So you've got the front middle bodice, the front side bodice, 2 of them. You've got the back side bodice, 2 of them again. You've got 1 of the back shearing panel. You've got the facings, and then you've also got the sleeves, and then that little strap at the back, or the tie rather. Don't forget to cut all the notches. These are good just for helping you match everything up later. Very important. See those little notches I'm doing? Just snip a little line into there if you don't know what notches are. So I always do a little test. So whenever I sew with a new thread, get a new needle, etc., just to make sure everything's working right. So we're on to the first step. We're getting the front middle panel and the side panels of the front bodice. I accidentally cut this twice. You don't need to do that, you only need it once. So you're going to pin the bodice front middle section to the side sections, right sides together. You're going to repeat for the other side, and then you're going to stitch it in place with the 12mm seam allowance, which is also 1/2 inch. Remember to back stitch at the start and end, and then press towards the center. This is the point where I like to overlock both of those edges. So obviously this is before I've pressed it. Then I take it to the iron and I give it a good press. I'm using my little ham, I forget what you call it, sewing ham. Believe you press towards the middle, towards the center, not towards the side. I'm using a lot of steam, and because it's a curve, that's why I'm using the ham. If you don't have a ham, you can use a rolled up towel. If you don't have a rolled up towel, don't worry about it. You can probably get away with just ironing it out. So now I'm going to stay stitch the bodice. So this is just stitching it within the seam allowance to make sure that you don't stretch it out as you do in other things. I'm just trying to get that middle point right. I don't think I succeeded there. But you do this for the back as well as the front, because it's very easy to stretch these out. I would almost suggest using some tearaway, which you can get from like a lot of shops like Spotlight. It just helps stabilize it. Or if you're just going to line the whole thing, that also would help. So now you're going to attach the side panels and the top shoulders. So you're just going to sew along those edges. Again, same 12mm seam allowance, 1/2 inch. Back stitching at the end and the front, just so nothing falls out. And this is with a regular 2.5 stitch, not a long stitch or anything like that. Then I'm going to press those seams towards the back. All of those seams, pressing them flat. I'm taking it to the overlocker, overlocking those edges, all the raw edges, the shoulders, the sides, both side panels, the back and the front, where you connected them. You could also use a zigzag stitch if you don't have an overlocker, that's also going to work. but if you are fully lining this, you're not. So now we're onto the back panel, the shearing panel. So you're going to want to hem this before you shear it. So I'm overlocking it from the right side to hem it. So instead of finishing it another way, I'm overlocking it. Both the top and the bottom I'm overlocking, and then I'm going to take it to the iron and give it a good press to get it into a 12mm hem, just a little small hem. So I use this little contraption thingy, got on eBay. Just helps you measure, and it's just helpful. It's like less than $10, I think it was like $5. I find it quite useful to get that sharp hem. Then you're going to stitch it from the top. Usually you're supposed to stitch from the top when you hem. Sometimes I stitch from the bottom because I don't know if it's going to be all even and I'm going to get it right. But yes, you're meant to stitch from the top. So now we're going to mark our shearing lines. They're going to be about 12mm apart. You probably can get away with 1 centimeter if that's just easier for you. But I mark them out with a fabric pen, something that's going to rub off. Unfortunately, this can rub off quite quickly. So now you're going to need some shearing elastic. So you're meant to wind it by hand, so it doesn't have too much tension, but I find sometimes winding it on my machine just works better. So you need to set your machine to quite a long stitch and usually move up the tension. It really depends on your machine. It's kind of a bit of a problem. Have had different machines and they've all worked a bit differently. For my brother machine, putting it on 3.5 and I think a 6 tension has worked. Also, you're going to want to take it to the iron to press it. And then, when you do a little tester, shrink up and it's going to be smaller. So base it off that, not what it does straight out on the machine. I don't think you're getting it tight enough, but if you just give it a press, it'll shrink a bit and see if that's enough. If it's not, still try again. So now you're going to want to hem the bottom edge of the rest of it. So I'm overlocking it from the right side, and then I'm going to take it to the iron and give it a good press and press it up about 12mm. That's just the same as the back shearing panel, so you can match it easily. I'm using a little measuring tool here. Again, stitching it from the top side is what you're meant to do. It just looks better, the stitching on the top. But if you find it easier, you can stitch it from the bottom side just so you know you're catching it all. So now I'm pinning the shearing panel to the back panel. There should be a little notch, and that should be where the top edge of your shearing panel meets up. Also, there is one side of the panel that is a bit wider. That should be towards the top rather than the bottom, but you can flip it upside down if you're a bit bigger on the waist, if that works better for you. Then so again, it's right sides together. I don't tend to overlock this in place after I've sewn it straight away, because just in case this doesn't fit you right, and you want to adjust the panel, or you want to remove it and make a bigger panel, or you want to just remove a little bit out of the panel, it's just easier, because if you've already overlocked it, then it's locked in and you've got to unpick it, and it can be very annoying. So yeah, again, I'm just stitching this in place, 12mm seam allowance, both sides. Now we're moving on to the back little tie strap. So you should have 2 of them. You're going to fold them in half with an iron and then iron them together, so right sides together. I couldn't really tell with this fabric which is the right side, to be honest, because it was a linen, kind of looked the same on both sides. I don't know if this is a linen cotton or a straight linen. I think it might be a linen cotton. So you're sewing this in place with a 12mm. I give it a little bit of a trim. I forgot to do it, but you should stitch across one edge so that edge is enclosed. So then when you turn it through, one of the edges are closed and one of them is open. And the part that's open, you're going to attach it to go inside the facing. And the other side will be the other edge. So that will be closed and there won't be raw edges coming out here. So I turn this through. I use this little loop turner. It's kind of broken. It's missing its little piece at the top that like closes it, so it's a bit frustrating for me to get this through. This is sped up like a million times. You can see that it eventually went through. I give it a little bit of a press, good steam. You can see that steam getting everywhere, but that's really what you want. Pressed both of them flat. You could press them, I guess, round, but I like them flat because they're quite thin. So you need to tack these in place with just like a long stitch. Just keeps them in place before you attach the facing. So yeah, just quick little stitch keeps it in place. These should go just below where the seam edge matches, as you can see there. So I'm interfacing all of my facing pieces. If you're fully lining it, then you don't need to do that, don't worry about that. But yeah, I like this interfacing because it's not too heavy. Like some interfacings can be quite stiff and they can be quite not really the best choice for something like this. But this is quite, I think it's a woven interfacing from memory. So I stitched them together at the edges just like I did the shoulder of the actual bodice. And I'm overlocking the long edge, the inside edge, that where the point is, you can see, all the way around, because that's going to be exposed. You should also overlock those bottom edges, the ones that you can't see here that I forgot to do in this clip, but you should overlock those as well. I did end up doing them later, I just forgot about them. But yeah, it's just the bottom edge that will hang raw as well. So you're going to pin these in place. This is kind of a tricky bit because you've got that really big, or it's not a big point, you've got a point that's quite sharp where the bust sort of middle meets. So I sewed it all the way around with 12mm again, and now I'm clipping into the curves. When you get to those points, just hold the needle in the actual fabric and then pivot. And if you're not getting it quite right, you can reduce the stitches to like a lower stitch, like 2 or 1 or whatever. Then I'm taking it to the iron and giving it a good press. This is before I have understitched it. This is just sort of making to see if it's come out right. I don't think this one came out as sharp as some of the others. So yeah, here you can see me understitching it. So you can see the seam allowance should be towards the facing. So you're stitching the seam allowance to the facing, essentially. But yeah, it just means doing a really close line to the edge on the facing side. It just keeps everything laying flat, keeps everything from poking out, just helps with all that. So we're moving on to the sleeve. I am doing a long stitch in between those notches to gather. And I'm going to repeat that for both. Then I am pinning and stitching up the sides again with a 12mm seam allowance. Again, repeating it on the other one. I have already done the gathering stitch. You should do 2 gathering stitches. I only did 1 here, a bit cheeky. So now we're going to insert the sleeve into the arm. So you've got to gather in between those notches and sort of force the gathering in between there. So that's where all the puff is going to go. You're going to pin all around the edges, stitch it in place. Like you can see me doing here, it's stitched in place. It can be kind of fiddly getting in there in the armhole. So now I'm just going to overlock both sides, the inside of that shoulder. I also like to do a little stitch that keeps in the facing in place. I do it in between the shoulder seam, just so you can't see it, so it just looks like it's in there. It keeps it in place. Moving back onto the sleeves, I'm hemming the sleeve with I think I did 12mm. So either you're going to put some elastic in this and you're going to leave a gap where you can feed the elastic through and then you'll stitch that back up, or just stitch it all and just leave it open if you want to have a little bit more of a bell sleeve. It's up to you, whichever one you want to do. So obviously I'm making the short sleeve version, but there is a longer sleeve version if you like. So I'm just stitching this in place, I believe with a 12mm seam allowance. To get the measurement for the elastic, I just measure it on my arm. It's kind of a bit fiddly here, but just to see how loose you want it. I find it can be a bit difficult because some people might want it a bit tighter, some people might want it a bit looser. So I find just measuring it on your arm is just easier. So I use a little bit of a safety pin to get it in there and shove it through. I'm sure there's more advanced methods. I'm sure there's newer tools for this, but that's what I use. I just find it really easy. Just shove it all the way through. I also put a pin on the edge of the other side just so I don't lose it and it goes through. I've done that many times before and that's just what I do. Then I'm going to stitch up that little hole I left closed. And then you're finished. I'd love to see all your makes. If you end up making this, tag it at Helena So Luna. I'd love to hear and see everyone's makes. That would be amazing. I think it'd be really cool made into a dress. I think I might try to make it into a dress. You could just add a circle skirt, or you could add a gathered skirt and then add a zipper in the side, and then it'd be a dress.